I was sitting in a perfectly quaint little coffee shop in Shoreditch last week, sipping an oat milk flat white and minding my own business, when I overheard a conversation that made me want to slide under the table and permanently change my nationality. There was this American guy wearing a Patagonia fleece and carrying himself with that unmistakable Silicon Valley swagger, talking to a very polite, very exhausted looking British software developer. The American leans back, gestures vaguely with his hands, and says, "It's just crazy to think about how California basically invented the modern world. Like, before we put computers on desks, what were you guys even doing over here? Using abacuses?" I literally choked on my coffee. Using abacuses? I looked over at the British guy, expecting him to throw his tea in the American's face. Instead, he just took a very slow, very measured sip of his Earl Grey, blinked twice, and said, "Right. Well, actually, Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace were drawing up the architecture for the first programmable computer in London back in the 1840s. But I suppose Steve Jobs wearing a turtleneck is a lovely story too." The American froze. His brain literally could not compute the data. And sitting there watching this unfold, I realized something deeply, existentially terrifying about how we are raised back home. Americans don't lie about history, we just redecorate it until it matches our flag. I've been living here in the UK for almost 2 years now. I'm Olivia, by the way. I have collected an absolute vault of stories that prove a terrifying theory. There is a specific breed of American who genuinely believes we exported innovation to the rest of the world, like the globe was just sitting around in the dark waiting for us to show up with a patent. Let's start with the big one, the one that Tech Bro in Shoreditch tripped over, the computer. Here's the truth: we are completely conditioned to believe that computing, programming, and all of modern technology was birthed in a garage in California by two guys named Steve. We hold on to that myth because it validates our entire economic identity. It's the ultimate underdog story. But legally, structurally, historically, the genesis of the computer is overwhelmingly British. Back in the 1830s and 40s, while America was literally still figuring out how to get covered wagons across the Oregon Trail without dying of dysentery, a British mathematician named Charles Babbage was designing something called the analytical engine. It had an arithmetic logic unit, control flow in the form of conditional branching, and integrated memory. It was, by every definition of computer science, the first Turing-complete design for a general-purpose computer. And the first person to write an algorithm intended to be executed by this machine? Ada Lovelace, a British woman, an English aristocrat, who saw that numbers could represent entities other than quantity. She basically invented the concept of software. But when you tell an American this, their defense mechanism immediately kicks in. I saw the tech bro in the coffee shop do it in real time. He recovered from his shock and immediately pivoted. He goes, "Yeah, but they didn't build it. We built the microchip. We scaled it. We put it in people's houses." And that right there is the crux of the American mindset. We completely conflate commercializing something with inventing it. We think that because we put a sleek white plastic casing on a piece of technology and sold it at a mall, we are the gods of its creation. To an American, invention equals identity. To admit something was British first feels like surrendering pride. We need to talk about this because it happens with literally everything. Let's pivot from technology to something a little sweeter, but equally frustrating: chocolate. A few months ago, my cousin came over from Chicago to visit me. We were walking down the street, and we popped into a local Tesco to grab some snacks. We're standing in the candy aisle, which they call the sweets aisle here, and she's looking at all the Cadbury bars, the flakes, the Aeros. She sighs and says, "It's cute how they try to do chocolate over here, but nobody beats Hershey. America basically invented the chocolate bar." I had to physically grab her arm to stop myself from yelling. I dragged her out of the shop because I could feel the cashier judging us. In the US, we would never accept the fact that our most beloved nostalgic childhood treats are just mass-produced spin-offs of European innovations. We are taught that Milton Hershey is the Willy Wonka of reality, the man who brought the chocolate bar to the masses. But let's look at the actual historical timeline. For centuries, chocolate was a bitter drink. It wasn't something you could snap a piece off and eat. It was a beverage for rich people. Then in 1847, in Bristol, England, a company called J.S. Fry and Sons figured out how to mix cocoa powder, sugar, and melted cocoa butter to produce a paste that could be molded into a solid bar. They invented the modern chocolate bar, period. And a few years later, John Cadbury, another Brit, came along and commercialized the heck out of it. When I explained this to my cousin, she looked at me like I had just told her the moon was made of cheese. She literally said, "But Hershey's is the standard. It's what real chocolate tastes like." And that is where the psychological analysis gets absolutely fascinating. In America, we associate innovation with volume and branding. We dominate global media, we dominate advertising, so we assume our version is the original. Hershey didn't invent the chocolate bar, he just figured out how to make it cheaper, largely by using slightly soured milk, which is why British people think American chocolate tastes like vomit. But because my cousin grew up seeing Hershey commercials on every TV network, her brain anchored her cultural reality to that brand. She couldn't process the fact that a tiny company in Bristol, England, was doing this 50 years before Pennsylvania got involved. And speaking of Pennsylvania, let's talk about the Steel City misconception. I was at a dinner party in Yorkshire a while back. Beautiful old stone house, pouring rain outside, roasting fire inside. I was seated next to an American guy who was over here consulting for some corporate firm. He was from Pittsburgh, and he made sure everyone at the table knew it. He was talking about how Pittsburgh built the modern world, how American steel won the wars, built the bridges, and invented the modern skyscraper. He literally raised his glass and said, "Without American steel innovation, you guys would still be eating with wooden spoons." The table went dead silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy. A man sitting across from us, a local Yorkshireman who looked like he had stepped right out of a Dickens novel, slowly set his fork down. He looked at the American and said, in the calmest, most terrifyingly polite voice I have ever heard, "That's a fascinating perspective." Though I suppose Harry Brearley might have a word to say about that, seeing as he invented stainless steel right here in Sheffield in 1913, just down the road actually. I watched the American's face go through the 5 stages of grief. He blinked, his mouth opened slightly, and he tried to laugh it off. "Well, yeah, maybe the initial experiment," he stammered, "but Pittsburgh made it an industry. It is the exact same pattern every single time. Declare ownership, get politely annihilated by a British person with an encyclopedic knowledge of their local history, and then retreat into the safety of, well, we scaled it." Harry Brearley was an English metallurgist who literally discovered how to add chromium to molten iron to produce a rustless steel. He did it to stop rifle barrels from eroding. It changed the entire trajectory of modern manufacturing, medicine, and architecture. Sheffield became the absolute global epicenter of steel innovation. But because America built a football team called the Steelers and made a bunch of Bruce Springsteen aesthetic documentaries about blue-collar workers in the Rust Belt, we just mentally claimed the entire metallurgical timeline. We take the aesthetic of invention and mistake it for the genesis of invention. I want to pivot to something that makes me genuinely furious, and it happens almost every time an American opens their mouth about language. The dictionary dispute. I was at a pub in central London, and there was a group of American college students sitting at the next table. One of them was aggressively typing on her phone, arguing with a British student about the spelling of the word colour. The American girl was getting genuinely heated. She says, "You guys just add unnecessary letters to sound pretentious. It's COLOR. It's in the dictionary. We standardized English, you guys just overcomplicated it." I was literally shocked. The absolute audacity to sit in England and tell an English person that they are spelling English wrong. Here is the historical context that American schools conveniently leave out of the curriculum. English spelling was historically a chaotic mess. People spelled things however they sounded. But in 1755, a British man named Samuel Johnson published a dictionary of the English language. It was one of the most famous dictionaries in history, and it codified British English. It cemented the U in colour, the re in centre. It was the standard. So why do Americans spell it differently? Did we just naturally evolve a better, more efficient way of spelling? No. We did it entirely out of spite. After the American Revolution, a guy named Noah Webster, yes, the Merriam-Webster guy, decided that America needed to declare linguistic independence from Britain. He wanted a uniquely American form of English to separate us from the monarchy. So he literally just went into the dictionary and started deleting letters. He took the U out of colour. He changed is to eyes. He intentionally fabricated a new spelling system purely as a nationalist marketing campaign. When Americans sit there and tell British people that their spelling is extra or wrong, they are completely ignoring the fact that we are the spin-off. We are the remix. We purposely changed the code to be different, and now we have the nerve to complain that the original doesn't match the copy. It's peak American main character syndrome. And the British don't yell when you do this. They don't scream. The British student just looked at the American girl, smiled that deadly polite British smile and said, "Yes, it's a shame your founders couldn't afford those extra letters." Must have been the tea taxes. It was a bloodbath. The American didn't even realize she had been insulted until 5 minutes later. This brings me to the broadcast blunder. The television. We need to talk about this one, because it defines how Americans view global media. I was taking a tour of a museum here in London, and a family from California was in my tour group. We were walking through an exhibit on 20th century media, and the dad points to a massive, clunky wooden box with a tiny screen. He says to his kids, "Look at that. The British tried to copy our TVs back in the day. Too bad they didn't have Hollywood to give them anything good to watch." I stopped in my tracks. The tour guide, a lovely older gentleman in a tweed jacket, stopped talking. He turned to the dad and said, "Ah, yes, Hollywood, wonderful place. But actually, sir, the television was invented by a Scotsman, John Logie Baird. He gave the world's first public demonstration of a working television system in London in 1926. He also invented the first publicly demonstrated colour television system, and the first purely electronic colour television picture tube. So we didn't copy your television, sir. We gave you the box you put your Hollywood inside." The dad looked like he had been slapped. He literally took a step back. Wait, a Scottish guy? Not an American? In the US, we would never teach that. We are taught that television is inherently an American phenomenon. We think of the 1950s, black and white sitcoms, TV dinners, the moon landing broadcast. We associate the golden age of television so heavily with the post-war American economic boom that we retroactively claim the invention of the cathode ray tube. We don't see global influence as a shared human endeavor. We see it as something that must have originated in an American laboratory, probably funded by the military, and then generously gifted to the rest of the world. But the reality is that John Logie Baird was experimenting with spinning cardboard discs and bicycle lamps in Hastings, England, transmitting flickering silhouettes while American broadcast networks were still trying to figure out how to make radio profitable. And it's the same with everyday infrastructure. The ATM, the cash machine. Let me tell you about the time I was standing in the pouring rain in London. Typical Tuesday, I was waiting in line to use a cash point outside a bank. There was an American businessman in front of me, complaining loudly on his phone about how slow European banking is. He's going off, saying, "These people are living in the dark ages. Wall Street practically invented modern finance. We invented the ATM, and I still have to stand in the rain to get a £20 note." I didn't say anything, but the woman behind me did. She tapped him on the shoulder. She looked like a sweet grandmother who baked scones on the weekends. She said, "Excuse me, love, just thought you should know, the world's first ATM was installed right here in London, up in Enfield, 1967, invented by a chap named John Shepherd Barron. He got the idea from a chocolate vending machine. Wall Street had absolutely nothing to do with it. Have a lovely day." The businessman hung up his phone. He didn't say another word. He got his cash and walked away in the rain. John Shepherd Barron was a British inventor who literally changed the global economy. He worked for the printing firm De La Rue. He realized that if vending machines could dispense chocolate bars, there was no reason a machine couldn't dispense cash. He pitched it to Barclays Bank, and the rest is history. But Americans assume that because Wall Street is the financial center of the modern world, all financial technology must have spawned there. We think if a machine involves money and convenience, it simply must have an American passport. It is a staggering lack of curiosity about how the world actually functions outside of our own borders. But maybe the most profound, emotionally jarring example of this is the WWII savior complex, specifically radar. I was visiting the Imperial War Museum. It's an incredibly sobering, beautifully curated space. I was walking through the World War II exhibit, which details the Battle of Britain, the Blitz, the time when London was being bombed into rubble night after night for months. An American dad was walking his teenage sons through the exhibit, and he says to them, "You know, the Brits were brave, but if we hadn't given them our radar technology, they would have been totally wiped out before we got here to save them." I stopped breathing. A museum docent, an elderly man who looked like he might have actually lived through the Blitz, walked over. He didn't look angry, he just looked tired. He said, "Excuse me, sir, I believe you might be mistaken. Radar was practically a British invention. Sir Robert Watson Watt built the first practical radar system for the British Air Ministry in 1935. It was the chain-home radar network that gave the Royal Air Force the early warnings they needed to win the Battle of Britain in 1940. Long before America entered the war, we didn't borrow your technology, sir. We shared ours with you." The American dad's face went completely blank. "Oh," he said, "I thought I read somewhere." "It's quite all right," the docent said gently. "History is a very big book, hard to read all the chapters." That moment broke me, because it encapsulates everything perfectly. In America, history is taught like a Marvel movie, and we are the Avengers. We enter in the third act, we have the best technology, we make the biggest explosions, and we save the day. Our textbooks are fundamentally designed to highlight American exceptionalism. We aren't taught that the British stood alone for a year, using their own homegrown, highly advanced scientific technology to hold off the greatest military threat the world had ever seen. We are taught that the world was waiting for us. We are taught that American innovation is the shield that protects the globe. When Americans travel abroad and encounter these historical truths, it triggers a massive identity crisis. It's not just about realizing you got a fact wrong about a machine or a spelling rule. It's about realizing that your country is a teenager in the geopolitical family. We are loud, we are confident, we are incredibly wealthy, and we have done amazing things. But we lack the deep, bone-weary wisdom of the grandparents. The UK has been sitting here for thousands of years, quietly building the foundations of the modern world. They were doing the math, melting the steel, writing the code, and transmitting the signals while we were still trying to map our own coastlines. The British way of correcting Americans is an art form. Every British correction feels like a slap made of velvet. They don't shout, they don't humiliate you, they just quietly present you with a plaque, a date, and a gentle smile, and they let your own realization do the heavy lifting. In America, correction feels like an attack on your freedom. In Britain, it feels like weather. You just have to stand there and endure it until you are completely soaked in facts. And that is what I've learnt after 2 years of living here. The American instinct to claim everything isn't born out of maliciousness. It's born out of isolation. We are so geographically massive, so culturally dominant, that we rarely have to look outside our own windows to see how the house was built. We assume that if something is good, if something is important, it must have come from us. We don't inherit culture. We acquire it like a corporate merger, and then we rebrand it as our own. But there is a beauty in having that illusion shattered, because once you get over the initial sting of being wrong, once you stop trying to explain British inventions back to the British, you finally get to actually appreciate the world for what it is. You realize that you don't have to be the inventor of everything to enjoy it. You can just be a guest. You can walk into a pub that was standing before your country had a name, eat a chocolate bar that was perfected before your Civil War, and pay for it with money from a machine invented down the street. So the next time you hear an American confidently explaining how we revolutionized the world, just remember it's not arrogance, it's a curriculum problem. Our textbooks weren't exactly lying, they were just incredibly incomplete. If you ever come to the UK, bring your Wi-Fi, bring your optimism, but leave the alternative facts at the airport. Because I promise you, there is a British person sitting in a pub right now, sipping a pint, who knows exactly what year you are wrong about, and they are just waiting for the perfect, politely devastating moment to tell you. Cheers, y'all!